Okay, so Romania just got hit by the Russians, and Romania is a NATO member. So we're going to take a minute to talk about NATO because I'm looking at NATO, I'm looking at everything going on, and it seems like NATO is the paper tiger. It seems like NATO is the organization that's always blustering and pushing bravado, but doesn't actually want to fight. So NATO, obviously, we know the history of NATO. It started after World War II to counter the Soviet Union after they took over Eastern Europe. So we had NATO and the Warsaw Pact for decades until the Soviet Union dissolved over 30 years ago. NATO stuck around and they grew with Russian hatred. And here we are today, a proxy war between NATO and Russia. And my question about NATO, something that I've been wondering for over a year, is NATO afraid of Russia? Because I believe they are. You have all these countries, over 30 nations at this point, all ganging up on one country. And I guess you can say two if you count Belarus, but they're not really in combat action. They're just allowing Russia to use their land for leverage. But you have all these countries ganging up on Russia, and they're using Ukrainians as their pawns to take the hits for them, to die for them, because a lot of people in the West, like if you go to UK, you go to American citizens, they couldn't stomach the losses because their estimated reports that somewhere between 350,000 and 400,000 Ukrainian men are dead and even more casualties. And the American people, they just couldn't stomach that. They couldn't stomach a staggering loss, a year and a half, that many men dead. The United States, they rather have other people die for them, for their causes, for the interests of Washington, D.C. You have teenagers in Ukraine dying. They're pushed to believe some other reason. Oh yeah, you're dying for this cause, for this reason. You're a hero. You're dying for the interests in Washington, D.C. and in London. That's why these men have been put in body bags. You have this massive organization comprising of 13% of the world population, 3 nuclear powers in France, UK, and the United States. And yet, they do all this crap talking. They talk about how strong they are. United States is allegedly the strongest nation on the planet. But they keep pushing these Ukrainians, this third world country, to die for them. And that brings us back to Romania. What's been reported is that a drone fell over the border. So there's a small border, small river border between Romania and Ukraine in the Black Sea area. And the report is from the Romanians is that Russian drones just so happened to crash and land over the river right into Romanian territory, which we know is a lie. United States is going along with this too. So all the Western media outlets who are told what to say by the Pentagon and by the politicians in Washington, all the Western media is pushing the same narrative. Well, the drones just so happened to barely cross the border and it fell and nothing really happened. That's because NATO don't want that smoke. NATO doesn't want to admit the truth about what happened, because this reminds me of Poland. About a year ago, Poland got hit and 2 people died. Allegedly, it was just 2 random farmers in the middle of nowhere right across the Ukrainian and Polish border. So when these farmers got hit, the United States and Poland were saying, oh, that must have been Ukraine. Ukraine accidentally misfired and the missile landed over here and killed these people. And no, there's no way it could have been Russia. And they finally admitted that it was Russia. Lord Austin, Secretary of Defense, he's up here looking terrified. Yeah, but it wasn't a real attack. This one doesn't count. We're not going to count this. Yes, a Russian missile landed in Poland and killed people, but no, it doesn't count. It doesn't count as an attack. We're just going to ignore this. And they're doing the same thing over here in Romania. They're saying, well, this drone must have accidentally landed over here in Romania and just so happened to crash. But here's the thing. When these things crash, we don't really get good insight onto what exactly was hit, because we see this debris, looks like some building, could have been some type of intelligence depot. Maybe U.S. officers were working there. Maybe they had weapons there, fuel, other type of items to help the Ukrainians. Maybe the Russians decided to hit it on purpose because it was militarily important. But the Romanians, the Americans, and the Poles, they don't want to fight. So even though they have Article 5, if you dare attack us, we're all going to gang up on you and jump you, and we'll kill you in 2 seconds, allegedly. But when they're actually hit, they say, no, that didn't even happen. Nope, not true. Stop lying. Stop saying that the Russians attacked NATO members. Then when the facts come out, They said, well, no, it was an accident. Those attacks against NATO members, they don't really count. So we have a lot of bluster because people hype up the United States talking about, you don't want the United States to get involved in this war. The Ukrainians are exposing the Russians. The United States will wipe out the Russians in 2 seconds. Okay, do it. Let's end the war. Because of course they wouldn't. And this not even about nuclear power, because we know Russia has the most nuclear weapons in the world. They got the same 2 missile, which is probably the most powerful weapon on the planet. United States got the Minuteman III. Russians have the same 2. So pick one. They're both extremely destructive weapons. So we could talk about nuclear war. But even when you look on the ground in the conventional warfare settings, the Americans and the rest of NATO, they don't want that smoke. So that's why they send these poor Eastern European countries to do the dying for them. Because people hype up the Americans as the best military in the world because they spend so much, even though there's a lot of corruption in military spending. These defense contractors and these politicians are making a shit ton of money off of it. But people want to ignore that, and they just want to talk about other countries being corrupt, even though the Americans are just as corrupt or more corrupt than any other nation on the planet when you look at it. So when you look at conventional warfare, the Americans aren't ready. The readiness of the American army is not ready for a modern war in Europe. And people talking about what they did in 1991 to Iraq when they had a technological advantage, superior intel. Iraq was just not on that level. And then after that, the United States spent 30 years fighting cavemen in the Middle East because the United States was fighting the Taliban and ISIS and all these other countries that can't fight back. All these other countries are a bunch of guys with sandals, robes, and AK-47s. And you rolling in there with the highest graded 21st century tech. You roll in there with all of that. Abrams tanks, using satellites, drones, all of this against a bunch of cavemen. And that has softened the U.S. Army. These guys haven't fought against an army that can fight back. They haven't fought against a modern army with ISR strikes, with overhead surveillance, with drones, with satellites, with submarines. The Americans have grown soft and the readiness is way down. The army is shrinking. A lot of equipment is not up to par. The ability for Americans to ramp up production. That's why Joe Biden admitted a little while ago, maybe a month or two ago, that the Americans ran out of missiles, so they had to send cluster munition to Ukraine. So the Americans quickly ran out of missiles trying to combat the Russians, and their ability to ramp up production with their defense contractors is just not there because the system has become so corrupt. These politicians are so in bed with a handful of defense contractors that America has lost that ability that it had back in the Cold War, back in World War II, to rapidly ramp up production. When we're in war, you need to ramp up production 10x, 20x, produce millions of missiles, mines, etc. But America doesn't have the capability of doing that right now. And right now the Russians are doing it 24/7. They're ramping out bullets, drones, missiles, and they're also receiving some from Iran, from North Korea, other countries like that. Then when you look at the brigades that America has stationed in Europe already, they're light infantry, and those guys can't go and combat against armored Russian units in Eastern Europe. They quickly be overwhelmed. And if Russia and America got in a full-blown hot war, it would be extremely difficult for America to transport troops across the world like that, because people keep thinking about the Middle East. You fought cavemen who had no technology. So if the Americans try to rapidly push reinforcements over there, most of the heavy equipment, heavy weapons will have to be transported by ship. And the Russians have submarines. These ships can be sunk because there's a saying in naval warfare that you have submarines and then you have targets. That's all there is. Regular ships are just targets for submarines. So the Atlantic Ocean, we become a hotspot between Russia and the Americans because trying to get all that equipment over there will be extremely difficult against an enemy that can fight back. So the American readiness is piss poor at this point. The Americans have a lot of work to do to prep itself for a modern enemy. And then if they do get a lot of those troops and armor over there, somehow, some way, Now you have to deal with a military with satellite surveillance, with drones, with ISR strikes, with infinite artillery. You have to deal with trenches, millions of mines. You have to deal with all of this, something that the modern American military has not faced. So people keep getting arrogant because they've looked at what the Americans did to Iraq, what they did to Syria, what they're doing over there to people in Niger. So they're looking at that and they're thinking that the Americans can just easily steamroll anybody in the world at any moment. And that's just simply not true. They need to ramp up their readiness for 21st century warfare against real enemies that can actually fight back. And when you look at the rest of NATO, Jesus, NATO is basically United States and a bunch of flunkies, because America has built this global empire. You have the American empire and a bunch of vassal states. And that's what NATO are. They're a bunch of vassal states. These countries are not ready at all. Let's look at the UK. The UK's army is shrinking. So they plan over the next year and a half, 2 years, to shrink their army down another 10,000 soldiers down to 73,000. So these guys are going backwards. You have many over there advocating for increasing the budget for the army, for increasing the size of the army. But the people over there in London are saying, nah, we're not going to pay for that. If anything happens, the Americans are going to take care of us. In fact, there was a discussion over there in the House of Commons about the UK's military readiness. So let's look at some of the stuff they said. Answering Mr. Francois' question, Dr. Simon Angling from King's College London presented a less than promising assessment. If the United Kingdom was attacked tonight, it would be a case of our armed forces that are committed to NATO that will respond. Right now, the British Army says that it can put a single heavy division into the field, and it is a rather understrength division. It has 2 brigades instead of the requisite 3. So you have 70-ish thousand troops, right? Only about 20-30% of those are actually combat troops, infantry, armored troops like that. The rest of these guys are just admin, finance, and non-combat support. So the British need at least 12 to 15,000 men in a division. You need multiple, dozens of divisions in order to go against the Russians. These guys can't even make a single division. Their Air Force readiness is a little bit better, but it's still not there. It's not ready to go to war against Russia, especially if they tried to deploy troops to Eastern Europe. It'd be one thing if the British tried to defend their homeland, if the Russians tried to invade the English islands. They would put up a hell of a fight. They would be in defensive mode. But to go on the offense, to deploy troops to Ukraine, to try to hit Belarus and Russia, the UK would get decimated. Absolutely decimated. They're not ready at all. And they even know that. Let's look at this. In that sense, if you ask the question, Russia attacks us conveniently tonight, madness. But if it did so, we would probably be all right, especially because the Americans would then come steamrolling in. This is what NATO is. It is America and a bunch of weak ass countries in Europe. These guys can't fight. They can't do anything. They're just completely reliant on America. And America itself is not ready for this type of war. Look at Germany. Germany's defense minister, whatever that lady's name was, I forgot, Lehman or something. She had to resign because it's easy to be in these positions during peacetime. She was a friend of the Prime Minister Schultz over there, and she was in the same party with him. So he put her in this position. He said, you know what? You're going to be the Minister of Defense. You're going to be in charge of the entire German military. But when shit hit the fan, and it really didn't hit the fan, but a conflict broke out in Eastern Europe, close to Germany, but not in Germany. Germany's not involved. She got exposed. She didn't know a goddamn thing about the military. She's just a politician put in this high position, and she had to resign because these Germans are clowns, man, when it comes to this. Why would you assign a lady who knows nothing about the military? What the hell? And people laughed at Germany when the whole thing broke out because Germany didn't want to get involved, right? So when Russia did its official invasion of Ukraine, the Germans said, you know what? We stand out of this. We're not going to be involved in this because Germany was under U.S. and Russian occupation for decades after World War II due to the Cold War. And now Germany is just a vassal state, a flunky of the Americans. So Germany didn't want anything to do with it. And the Americans said, no, you getting involved. So Germany said, you know what, we'll send 5,000 helmets to the Ukrainians. And everybody started laughing and saying, what the hell is this? You guys are trash. We need some real help. But the truth is, Germany didn't have anything else to send. 5,000 helmets was a whole lot for the Germans because these guys can't field a single division. These guys have troops that they can't even equip. These troops don't have uniforms. They don't have helmets. A lot of them don't have weapons. And they're sitting here talking about, well, by 2025, we're going to have some new backpacks and some new boots. What? Are you serious? Over 2 years, you're going to have new boots and backpacks? This is the state of Germany's military. I think it was Schultz or someone in defense over there. They said they promised that by 2025, they'll have one division ready for combat. And that one division will have to be a supplement to larger NATO forces, basically standing behind U.S. Army forces in a battlefield. And people think that NATO would just go in and say, oh, if the Russians keep talking, we'll just send Germany, Poland, and France and them. They just wipe out the Russians in 2 days. Russia will mop the floor with these countries. In fact, Ukraine will mop the floor with Germany and England because these countries are not ready for war. So they do all this talking, they do all this bluster, but at the end of the day, they don't want to fight. When Poland gets hit by Russia, because like I said, Russia could have been targeting some military crap over there, but they're coming out with this narrative saying, oh, it was just some random farmers. It was just some random house over here, some random building that just got hit, even though we don't know what it was. When Russia actually strikes these places, hit 2 of them within a year, hit 2 NATO countries, NATO sits there and gives Russia excuses. No, that doesn't count as a real attack. We're not going to do anything. Of course you're not going to do anything because you're not ready. All NATO do right now is talk. This organization is not combat ready. Yeah, they're combat ready when it comes to Afghanistan, when it comes to Iraq. Remember how quick they were to attack Kosovo back in the 90s? NATO, a defensive organization, bombarded the hell out of Kosovo, killed all those people over there because they said they were protecting the Albanians. And Albania wasn't even a part of NATO at that point. But they were quick to jump in, beat the brakes off of these people and brag, look how strong we are. Look, we beat Kosovo. We beat the brakes off of them. Look how quick we took over Baghdad. We're strong. We're strong. You're fighting cavemen, third world country, people who can't fight back. But when it comes to a modern 21st century army, NATO just talks. So my question is, who's the real paper tiger? Because I don't know. From my point of view, looking at this, it just doesn't look like NATO is ready. Question is NATO going to get ready? Because another thing that NATO's been doing is telling Ukrainians how to fight. Oh, we're getting NATO training. We're giving them superior NATO training, sending them back to get killed. The U.S. is telling Ukraine how to fight. The U.S. is giving Ukraine money, weapons, intel, recon. They're giving them all of this stuff. They're getting the brakes beat off of them. The Ukrainians stopped following U.S.'s strategy because it wasn't working. The Russians built these 3 lines of defense. The United States, okay, look, we're the best army in the world. So this is what you need to do to break these lines of defense. You do this, this, this. What happened? The Ukrainians go over there, get slaughtered. Then they say, God damn, these Americans don't know what the hell they're talking about. So the Ukrainian generals come up with their own tactics. Then the U.S. media says, oh, look at that. The Ukrainians, they're getting killed because they're not listening to the Americans. So yeah, I just want to point out that these NATO countries keep getting hit. And NATO does all this talk, all this bluster, and people online talk all this crap about how easily they will wipe out Russia. But it's all talk. Let me know what you think. Leave me your thoughts below. Share the video. Thanks for watching.